The question hit Victoria Chen like a scalpel through her already shattered heart. Standing at the Family Feud podium in her black memorial suit, the same one she'd worn to her son's funeral 18 months ago, she felt the familiar rage that had been consuming her since the day medical malpractice stole her child. The studio lights felt too harsh for a woman who had been living in the darkness of grief and fury for what felt like forever. "Who do you blame?" Steve Harvey had asked, and those three words unlocked a vault of anger so deep it threatened to consume everything in its path. Victoria's hands clenched into fists as she thought about the drunk surgeon who had killed her 16-year-old son during what should have been routine appendix surgery. The silence stretched as she tried to contain the rage that had been her only companion since Alex died on that operating table. It was Wednesday afternoon at the Family Feud studios in Atlanta. The Chen family had made the journey from Portland, Oregon, hoping this game show might provide a distraction from their ongoing legal battle against the hospital that had destroyed their lives. Victoria's husband James and her surviving daughter Emily stood behind her at the family podium, offering support for a woman who had declared war on the medical system. The game had started with Victoria's jaw already clenched. The Chen family was competing against the Martinez family from California, and Steve was working his usual magic with the crowd. But Victoria couldn't focus because every moment felt like time stolen from her crusade for justice, her mission to make sure no other family suffered what hers had endured. 18 months ago, Alex had been a healthy, athletic 16-year-old with college scholarship offers and dreams of becoming an engineer. Then came the stomach pain that turned out to be appendicitis, a simple routine procedure that millions of people survive without complications. What should have been an overnight hospital stay became the worst nightmare any parent could imagine. The surgeon assigned to Alex's case was Dr. Richard Hoffman, a man with a history of alcohol abuse that the hospital had covered up for years. He had been drinking before Alex's surgery, his hands were unsteady, and he made a series of fatal errors that turned routine appendix removal into a death sentence. "The doctors who killed my son," Victoria said into the microphone, her voice cold and sharp as a blade. The words came out with surgical precision, each one carefully chosen to convey the depth of her fury. The studio fell silent as everyone processed the devastating accusation behind her answer. Steve's face immediately changed as he realized this wasn't about abstract blame. This was about medical malpractice and the death of a child. The cameras captured every emotion crossing Victoria's face: rage, grief, determination, and the kind of focused anger that drives people to seek justice at any cost. "Tell me what happened," Steve said carefully, stepping closer to Victoria. His voice carried the weight of someone who understood that some stories required careful handling. The audience leaned forward, sensing they were about to hear something that would shake their faith in the medical system. "Alex had appendicitis," Victoria said, her voice steady but filled with controlled fury. "Simple surgery. Routine procedure. Millions of people have it done safely every year." She paused, building to the devastating truth. "But Dr. Richard Hoffman was drunk," Victoria continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "He'd been drinking in his office before the surgery. The nurses smelled alcohol on him, but they didn't stop him." The revelation hit the studio like a physical blow. The audience gasped audibly as they tried to comprehend a surgeon operating while intoxicated. The cameras captured the horror on people's faces as they imagined their own children under the knife of a drunk doctor. "He nicked Alex's superior mesenteric artery," Victoria continued with clinical precision. "A mistake a sober surgeon would never make. My son bled out on the operating table while Hoffman tried to cover up his error. The medical details made the tragedy even more visceral and real. Alex died because a drunk doctor was allowed to cut into my child," Victoria said, her voice breaking slightly. "And the hospital covered it up. They said it was a rare complication, an unfortunate outcome. They lied to protect a killer." Steve Harvey made a decision that would define this moment forever. He looked directly at Victoria and asked the question that cut to the heart of her pain. "What do you want to happen to him?" The question acknowledged her anger while giving her space to express it. "I want him in prison," Victoria said without hesitation. "I want his medical license revoked. I want him to face the same justice any other killer would face." Her demands were clear, specific, and driven by a mother's fury over her child's preventable death. "And I want the hospital held accountable," Victoria continued. "They knew he had a drinking problem. They'd covered for him before. Other patients had complained. They chose profits over patient safety, and my son paid the price with his life." The scope of the cover-up was becoming clear to everyone in the studio. This wasn't just about one drunk doctor, it was about systemic failure, institutional corruption, and the prioritization of reputation over patient safety. Victoria's anger was expanding beyond personal grief into righteous indignation. "What's happening with the legal case?" Steve asked. The question shifted focus from Victoria's pain to her fight for justice, acknowledging that she was actively working to hold the responsible parties accountable. "We're in the middle of a wrongful death lawsuit," Victoria replied. "The hospital is fighting us with an army of lawyers. They're claiming Alex had a pre-existing condition that contributed to his death. The lies and victim blaming added insult to devastating injury. They're saying my healthy, athletic son was somehow responsible for his own death," Victoria continued, her voice filled with disgust. "They'll say anything to avoid admitting they let a drunk butcher kill children." The legal battle was clearly taking its toll on Victoria's family. Steve could see the exhaustion behind her anger, the way fighting for justice was consuming her life and energy. The audience was witnessing a woman transformed by tragedy into a crusader for accountability. "How is your family handling all this?" Steve asked gently. The question acknowledged that Victoria wasn't suffering alone. Her husband and daughter were also victims of the hospital's negligence and the legal system's delays. "My husband wants me to accept a settlement and move on," Victoria admitted. "My daughter wants her mom back. But I can't move on knowing that Hoffman is still practicing medicine, still potentially killing other people's children." The conflict between personal healing and public justice was tearing Victoria's family apart. She was trapped between her need for accountability and her family's need for closure, with no clear path forward that satisfied both requirements. Behind the scenes, producers were unsure how to handle this unprecedented situation. This had gone far beyond typical game show territory into criminal justice, medical malpractice, and systemic corruption. But Steve Harvey recognized that some moments required witnessing rather than entertaining. "Victoria," Steve said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute honesty, "your anger is justified. What happened to Alex was criminal. A mother has every right to demand justice for her murdered child. His validation of her rage was powerful and necessary." The audience began to respond with visible emotion. Parents throughout the studio were imagining their own children in operating rooms, trusting doctors to do no harm. Victoria's story had shattered their faith in medical safety and reminded them that hospitals could be dangerous places. "But I'm worried about you," Steve continued. "I'm worried that your justified anger is consuming your life and hurting your family. How do you find balance between seeking justice and living your life?" The question was both compassionate and practical. "I don't know," Victoria admitted, her armor cracking slightly. "Some days I think about nothing but the lawsuit. Other days I can't get out of bed. I'm angry all the time, and I don't know how to be anything else anymore." The honesty of her confession revealed the personal cost of her crusade. Victoria had become defined by her fight for justice, but that identity was isolating her from the people she loved most. Her grief had transformed into something that was consuming her life, rather than honoring Alex's memory. What happened next would become one of the most powerful moments in television history. Steve looked directly into the cameras and addressed America about a crisis hiding in plain sight. "Ladies and gentlemen, medical errors kill more people than car accidents, but we never talk about it. This woman's son was murdered by medical malpractice, and she's fighting alone while the system protects the killers," Steve continued. "We need to support families like this and demand accountability from hospitals that put profits over patients." His words elevated Victoria's personal tragedy into a public health crisis. Behind the scenes, patient safety advocates who had been contacted by the production team were standing by to offer Victoria resources and support. This wasn't just television anymore, it was activism, community organizing, and systemic change happening simultaneously. The conversation continued with Steve helping Victoria understand that seeking justice and healing her family weren't mutually exclusive goals. He encouraged her to find ways to honor Alex's memory that didn't require sacrificing her own mental health or her relationships with her surviving family members. "Alex would want you to fight for justice," Steve said, "but he'd also want you to take care of his sister and his father. He'd want his mother to find peace, not just punishment." The wisdom offered Victoria a framework for balancing her competing obligations. Victoria's face began to change as she considered Steve's words. The anger didn't disappear, but it was joined by something else. The possibility that she could honor Alex's memory without destroying herself in the process. The audience witnessed a mother beginning to imagine life beyond rage. "I dream about him every night," Victoria revealed. "Sometimes he's telling me to keep fighting. Other times he's asking me why I'm so angry all the time." The dreams reflected her internal conflict between justice and healing. Steve's response was both gentle and firm. "Listen to both messages. Fight for justice, but don't let anger steal the rest of your life. Alex needs you to be his mother, not just his avenger." The distinction offered Victoria a path forward that honored both her son's memory and her family's needs. The episode would later become a catalyst for conversations about medical malpractice reform and patient safety. Victoria's story inspired legislation requiring hospitals to report impaired physicians and creating stronger protections for patients facing surgical procedures. 6 months after the taping, Victoria's lawsuit resulted in a significant settlement and Dr. Hoffman's permanent loss of his medical license. More importantly, the hospital implemented new safety protocols and monitoring systems to prevent impaired physicians from treating patients. Victoria used part of the settlement money to establish the Chen Patient Safety Foundation, which advocates for transparency in medical errors and supports families affected by preventable deaths. Her anger had found a constructive outlet that honored her son's memory while helping others. The relationship between Victoria and her surviving family gradually healed as she learned to channel her rage into productive advocacy rather than consuming bitterness. Family therapy helped them process their grief together while supporting Victoria's continued fight for justice. The annual Chen Memorial Lecture at Portland Medical School educates future doctors about the devastating impact of medical errors on families. Victoria speaks at each event, sharing Alex's story and challenging medical students to prioritize patient safety over professional protection. Letters from other families affected by medical malpractice continue to arrive at Victoria's foundation, with parents sharing how her public advocacy gave them courage to seek justice for their own lost children. Her willingness to fight publicly inspired others to break their silence. The legal victory against Dr. Hoffman set important precedents for holding impaired physicians accountable for patient deaths. Other prosecutors began pursuing criminal charges in similar cases, citing Victoria's case as evidence that drunk doctors should face the same consequences as drunk drivers. Today, Victoria works full-time as a patient safety advocate, traveling the country to speak at medical conferences and legislative hearings. Her transformation from grieving mother to powerful advocate proves that anger can become a force for positive change when properly channeled. The black suit she wore that day still hangs in her closet next to the graduation gown Alex never got to wear. Both serve as reminders of loss and purpose, representing the life that ended and the mission that began in its aftermath. Dr. Hoffman's alcohol treatment and loss of medical license became a model for how medical boards should handle impaired physicians. Victoria's relentless pursuit of justice created systemic changes that protect countless future patients from similar tragedies. The memorial garden Victoria planted in Alex's honor has become a gathering place for families affected by medical errors. Each plant represents a life lost to preventable medical mistakes, creating a living monument to the need for accountability and reform. Because some anger is holy and some fights are necessary, even when they consume the fighters, Victoria Chen thought her rage would destroy her. But she learned that righteous anger can become righteous action when directed towards systematic change, rather than personal destruction. The miracle that happened on that Wednesday afternoon in Atlanta reminds us that some tragedies create warriors, and some mothers find their purpose in preventing other families from suffering similar losses. Victoria's transformation from victim to advocate proved that love for a dead child can become protection for living ones. Her story continues to inspire families facing medical malpractice to speak up, seek justice, and demand accountability from healthcare systems. Alex's death became a catalyst for saving other children's lives through improved safety protocols and physician monitoring systems. The foundation Victoria established now operates in 15 states, providing legal resources, emotional support, and advocacy training for families affected by medical errors. Each family helped represents Alex's continuing impact on the world, proving that some legacies grow stronger after death. Medical schools across the country now include Victoria's story in their ethics curricula, teaching future doctors about the human cost of medical errors and the importance of accountability. Her willingness to share her pain publicly has educated thousands of healthcare providers about their responsibilities to patients and families.